This is the lecture for European history for Monday, the 1st of November, 2021. We have a new quarter, and I do expect this week we're going to conclude the Age of Discovery and Exploration and Conquest and the Scientific Revolution so that you can have a unit exam this week.
What?
And next week, we wine. I'm not asking for wine. And I didn't bring cheese or little bread. Next week we'll start Unit 2. So, you are getting out your notepad, something to write on, something to write with. And we talk first about how discovery might work. I mean, Europe. When it goes out into the world, Europe is the only society in human history to explore beyond its region. It's the only society to go beyond the local area. When it does so, it's taking a chance because you never know just how many risks, just what kind of people you're going to find. There's a science fiction novel by the second man on the moon, astronaut Edwin Buzz Aldrin, called Encounter at Tiber. And it postulates another planet where a Columbus-like figure goes out from a Europe-like continent. But instead of discovering a bunch of primitives, he discovers a society hundreds of years ahead technologically. They just weren't interested in the sea. But now they are. And they end up conquering their version of Europe. Well, when Europe goes out into the world, it discovers only two societies on the planet more advanced than it. It discovers China and Japan. China and Japan are more advanced than Europe. They're the only places on Earth that are. And China and Japan, to Europe's benefit at this point in history, are both insular, inward-looking societies. Now, India is about as advanced as Europe, but it's so profoundly divided between religions, ethnic groups, language groups, castes, that it's fairly easy for the European powers, with their slight technological edge, to play the Indians off one another and divide and rule, and end up taking over, which is what they do. In the Middle East, they've gotten ever-increasingly stagnant Arab and Persian and Turkish society. And besides, before the age of petroleum, of oil, there's no reason to conquer the Middle East. It's a bunch of desert land. In sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, the Americas, and Australia, and the Pacific, they find nomadic hunter-gatherers, 10,000 years behind them, or more. The most advanced societies are farming societies, 5,000 years behind them or more. And in the Americas, you've got two civilizations, the Aztecs and the Incas, that are around when the Spaniards come, and both of them are about the level of Hammurabi's Babylon. That's 2,000 or more years behind Europe. So Europe is the only society to go out into the world, and it really benefits from this. And some results are that since most of the world is either more primitive than Europe or more easily manipulated, then the Europeans are going to end up dominating and taking over, which is what they do. Even China and Japan ultimately are eclipsed and overmatched. But you never know. At the beginning of the process, there was no guarantee that Columbus wouldn't come back in chains with Indians that had industry and machine guns. No guarantee. It was unknown. Now, why does this still matter to us today, this notion of discovery, of exploration? Because, well, we now see this planet as a fairly small thing, which means that we're getting cabin fever. We're feeling psychological pressure. The galaxy that we're in has ridiculous numbers of planets, like ours. Just by the math, ridiculous numbers of planets like ours. Even if we negate the possibility of life different from us, the likelihood of life like us, taking root and developing culture and civilization technology is extraordinarily high. And that's just within our galaxy. And there are countless galaxies in the heavens. At some point, someone may visit the Earth if they work out certain problems. And if they visit the Earth, well, maybe they already have. There are those who believe that life on Earth came from aliens. There are those who believe that evolution is a product of alien design. There's no proof of this, but there's no proof against this either. If in the future we encounter an alien civilization, I would much prefer to meet them in space than here on Earth. If we meet them in space, especially space beyond the solar system, we will have done the equivalent of what cultures do when they become civilizations. Remember, a culture needs cities to become a civilization. And to have functioning cities, a culture needs to develop solutions to the problems of crowding, of water, of manners, all sorts of problems to allow people to survive in crowded conditions. Societies that have cities do that, and they're much more powerful in general terms than societies that don't. Well, mastering spaceflight, exploring and exploiting our solar system, and moving out into interstellar space, that's going to involve solving a number of problems we can't even begin to imagine yet, planet-bound human beings. Now, if we get about doing it, we can really enrich the species, we can enrich the planet, we can expand our capabilities, we can begin to prepare to colonize other worlds, like Europa, in our solar system. We can do all sorts of things. And in doing them, we'll solve problems, develop our capabilities, so that when we meet an alien power, we won't be savages. We'll meet them in space, maybe as peers, as rough equals. And that's a hell of a lot better than meeting them as savages. Because as savages, we're either their food or their slaves, or we're just in their way when they want the world. It would be wise, I will call on you in a moment, for us to move out into space for another reason. Your children and grandchildren could be working out the problems of colonizing the surface of Mars, or again, Europa, or other places. Or they could be deciding what of countless genders they are. Or in other ways, trying to work out how many people need to know about their sexuality. Here's a hint. No one cares unless you're dating them. No one wants to know your sexuality. Keep it to yourself, for Christ's sake. We don't need to know.
You're oppressing me.
What kind of narcissist thinks that anyone else, especially total strangers, gives a damn? Do your job. Function in society. Love whoever the heck you want, within reason. Not children, not animals. Consensual adults. Within that bound, fine. But I don't want to know. I don't need to know. Why the heck do you think I would want to know these things? This is a sign of decay. That we are basically spinning our wheels with nothing worthwhile to do. We go out into space, there's plenty to do. There are plenty of problems to solve. Instead of being decadent, we might be vigorous again. That's my hope. In any case, I don't want to be some kind of jelly on an alien sandwich. I'd love to go out into space for that. Yes?
No, there's just a movie, and I don't remember what it's called, but it's where, like, aliens from Mars come to Earth. And
Is this called Mars Attacks?
No. I think so, yeah.
What movie?
Mars Attacks.
Mars Attacks.
Such a good movie.
Do they fight it with music from Wayne Newton? Yeah, it's Mars Attacks. Yeah, you don't want to be the victims of Mars attacks unless you have Wayne Newton music, and that's just lucky. I thought somebody would say, but everyone needs to know it's my sexuality. I'm liberated.
Well, you're
I
oppressing
don't
me.
care. I don't care. My indifference is not oppression. It's sanity. 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 Oh, God. That felt good. So, having said that, why do the Europeans go out into the world? Were there other questions or comments? Does anyone else want to talk about my oppression of their inner nature and selfness?
Is that an invitation?
Yeah, that's why I asked.
Alrighty then.
Yeah, but raise your hand, chip eater.
What?
Chip.
I thought that's an apple.
Raise your hand if you want to talk. Don't just talk.
It's an apple.
It's an apple chip.
Okay.
Okay. I insist. Here's where I'm repressing you. I will not call it an apple slice.
Why?
I will call it an apple chip because I called you chip eater.
Well, that's not
And
really
this way I'm not wrong.
That's
I
not
just
really.
redefine
You
chip.
can't admit that you're wrong.
I know.
That's
I don't
not
know
a
what
pressing
I'm
word,
wrong.
that's a
I can perfectly admit that when I'm wrong. I don't like it though. So I would rather redefine the food that you're eating as a chip of apple rather than admit that I was wrong in calling you chip eater.
But
Well,
you
then-
just did admit that you were wrong.
I admitted the possibility.
That's not a pressing hard.
It's
That's
not
a
the
pressing
same.
apple.
Actuality, yes it is.
Yes.
That's good. That's good logic. You're absolutely right. So, Europe. Could you aim that camera over here, please? So that it's aimed at this sort of a little bit.
Stand up, Adam.
Little more.
Better?
There, perfect.
Okay.
Okay. So, Europe, Jack, you're going to have to use your imagination on this, or you're going to have to move, because you're not going to be able to see it,
It's okay, he has a great imagination.
is in a giant pocket. We've
Don't
gone over this,
fall.
but I'm going to go over it again. South of Europe. What's the boundary of the pocket? What is this geographical feature here? Sit down, Jack. You can sit over there, and I will permit it. We got a seat next to Zoe here.
Nope.
It's 2 seats away. Not that one, the one beyond it.
Oh, okay.
Gosh, nobody wants your special extra chair.
Fine.
Okay. What is south of Europe? Abby,
The chosen one.
Hey.
The
what's this
desert.
feature here? What desert?
The Sahara Desert.
The Sahara Desert!
Oh no.
Yes! See, she knows. The Sahara Desert is a giant, I don't know how many thousands or 100,000 square miles of blasted wilderness where nothing lives. The Berbers who travel across it know where the few dozen wells are in the Sahara, but there aren't that many. It might as well be a 1,000-foot tall razor wire barrier with sharks with frickin' lasers on their heads on top.
That would be cool.
Pachoo. Because no Europeans going through there. Because the Berbers who live there don't like Europeans. Because they're Christians and they're white. Okay,
So they
what's to the west of Europe? What geographical feature? Anna. This body of water here. What's the Atlantic what? The Atlantic Ocean! Right, thank you. The Atlantic Ocean. Now, why is that a barrier? Well, it turns out that in the Atlantic Ocean, there's the edge of the world, see, that you'll fall off. And before that, you encounter space monsters, or I'm sorry, sea serpents that are like the Leviathans in the game Subnautica, which if you've never played, you should. It's an incredible game. It's a survival game, but it's really good. Subnautica. Trademark. Now, educated people know the world is round and suspect that sea monsters may not be shipivorous. But sailors who crew ships, they know the world's flat, and they know that there are sea monsters. So getting sailors to sail deep out into the Atlantic is kind of difficult because they think it's a trackless ocean. And even educated people think that there's one giant ocean between Europe and Asia that's too big to cross. So that might as well be a giant trench thousands of miles deep and thousands of miles across because nobody's going to cross this for a while. What's north of Europe? Sam.
Oh, the cold place. I'm sorry. My brain shut
Give you a
down.
hint. It rhymes with Plarctic. The Arctic!
Yeah.
Yes! Your 7th grade geography teacher is going to cry. I'm going to get Mr. What's his name back? Who was it?
Mr. Miles?
It was Mr. Miles
Oh,
that taught you or Mr. Hall?
Oh,
Hall.
wait, so
Mr. Hall's still here.
I had a
He
minute.
can take revenge on you next year in U.S. history.
Yeah.
It's the guy who doesn't know what the Arctic is.
What is
The Arctic is an icy wasteland filled with Inuit Eskimos, polar bears, and killer whales. Nobody's going through there. In fact, the Arctic and Antarctic are the 2 last places on the surface of the Earth that human beings visited. That wasn't until the 20th century. So, the Arctic, 3 layers. So now we got 2 eastern. We got the northern eastern and the southern eastern. Let's look northeast. It's a geographical feature called steppes. Steppes, S-T-E-P-P-E-S. Steppes are rolling grasslands. Rolling grasslands. Grasslands that roll. They are fun. When I was a little kid, when we had rolling grasslands, see, you have this to write on in case you need it. When you have rolling grasslands, that's what you do. You roll. So we had a little hill, and we were in a park or something. So my sisters and I, my friends and I, would go, wee, and we'd roll down the hill. Safe as houses. That's fun stuff. There's a problem, though. I mean, this sea of grass literally stretches from the Pyrenees Mountains of Spain all the way to the Pacific Ocean. The only thing that stands in the way are the Ural Mountains, and they're low and intermittent and fairly easily crossed. What could be wrong with steppes? It's rolling grasslands east of Europe. Does anyone remember? Yeah.
The DeSoto clan.
Is this what
Oh, you're not a part of the clan anymore. But you were born into it.
She's trying to annex you. I would consider resisting the imperialism that is DeSoto. Here is the problem with the sea of grass that are the steppes. There are human sharks in the sea of grass, and they are called Mongols and Tatars and Kazakhs and Hazars, Sungnu and Huns, and a bunch of other barbarian tribes, Turkmen too, and other kinds of Turks. Basically, you've got barbarians on barbarians in these grasslands, and they are predatory, and they don't like strangers. Now, if you go in there and you pay off the chiefs, if they're in a good mood, they'll let you pay them off. Okay, we'll take this in return. You can travel through our lands without being molested by us. On the other hand, they might just kill you and take all your stuff anyway. Yep, because that's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It is. So,
She would think that, of
that's
course.
the right spirit, absolutely.
DeSoto clan.
So going into Central Asia is actually, throughout history, molto dangeroso. Except for twice in history. One, when the Mongol Empire conquers all this, the Great Khan offers people safe passage. And if you're a tribal chief and you mess with the Great Khan's safe passage, you're going to die. So the family of Niccolo Polo, with his son Marco, travel across Central Asia's grasslandy steppes to China. And they're there, and Marco comes back and writes a book about it. Incredible voyage to Cathay and back. Obviously, it inspires that great aquatic event, the game Marco Polo that you play in the pool in the summertime. Because if you play it in the wintertime, there's something wrong with you. Like you're able to break through ice, like some kind of icebreaker.
Or what if you're just in really cold water?
That's true. You could like that, in which case, again, seek professional help, because you're flirting with hypothermia. Oh, hypothermia, you're so interesting. Tell me more. Show me your etchings. So, the other time it's safe in history is during the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and the Russian Federation today. And that is if you are okay with the Russian government.
Yeah.
Other than that, this area is blocked.
Propaganda.
We got one area in and out, and that's southeast through the Islamic Middle East. But what's the problem with getting, say, silks and spices in markets in the Islamic Middle East?
Once you get there, it's cheap, but it slowly gets up and up and up as you continue on.
Yeah, the farther away from the source of silks in China and spices in the East Indies is more expensive. But there's something more than that. Hey, what happens to Christians when they go to the Islamic markets of the Middle East to buy silks and spices?
Islamic people don't like them very much.
And as a result, they do what to the prices?
They put them up. They're more expensive.
They jack up the prices. Right. Because they don't like white people from Europe. Actually, it's not a racial thing. They don't like Christians. It's bad enough that Christians worship the same true God that they worship. They worship the same true God wrong. And that in some ways is even worse than pagans. Pagans are just ignorant. Christians are stupid. So, let's have 100% extra price for those Christian dudes from Italia. And that's what they do. Now, you may not understand this, but human beings don't like being cheated. They don't like having to pay ridiculous amounts of money for no good reason. So the Europeans are going to be mightily motivated to find a way around the Islamic bottleneck for silks and spices. That brings us to Prince Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry the Navigator is a Portuguese prince of the royal house. And unlike most princes who are not going to inherit the throne, Henry the Navigator does not spend his money on wine, women, and song. Well, not all of his money anyway. He does not spend all of his money on wine, women, and song. Now, thank you. Why would most princes do that? Because young heterosexual men like the wine, like the women, and they like the song. Yeah. It's fun. But Henry is going to spend his royal allowance on a little tiny peninsula of land sticking out into the Atlantic Ocean off the west coast of Portugal called Sagres. Sagres is not spelled whoop, 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 like the helicopter going overhead. Sagres is spelled S-A-G-R-E-S. It looks like Sagres. But it's not Sagres, it's Sagres, because it's Portuguese. And he establishes a school at Sagres, whose buildings 600-700 years later still exist. Let's see, it was the 1420s, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 600 years ago. The buildings are still there. And in these buildings, Henry gets three kinds of people that don't normally mix. You may want to note this down. The first type of person are astronomical navigators. Astronomical navigators. Navigators. And since you see Prince Henry the Navigator written there, you just put an S on that word. Astronomical navigators. Some of them are astrologers. Some of them are astronomers. Some of them are ship navigators. All of them are good at looking at the nighttime sky and figuring out where on Earth they are. Because the thing about the ocean, the thing you really need to understand is there are no landmarks on the ocean unless you're near an island or a coastline. On land, if you don't know where you are, you can look for a landmark. But it's the ocean. No land! No landmark! Trackless sea. So, the nighttime sky has clues to tell you where you are. Astronomical navigators, first group of three. Second group of three. Salty sea dogs, experienced sea captains. You can write experienced sea captains. Or, if you'll remember it, salty sea dogs. There's a salty sea dog. Salty sea dogs are experienced sea captains, have been there and done that. They understand how to handle ships and how to handle men. They're used to catching the wind with their sails. They're used to determining when the storm winds are too strong and they've got to furl their sails. They're used to leading men who are panicked, dealing with pirates and savages and mutinies, dealing with storms and calms, and the calms are worst. At latitude 20 north, 20 south, they're the horse latitudes. They're called the horse latitudes because the trade winds just stop sometimes for weeks or months. No wind. You're in a sailing ship. That means nobody's moving. You run out of food. You run out of fresh water. There's no more rain. So you eat the horses first. That's why they're called the horse latitudes. Tasty horse meat. So, sea captains have done all this stuff. They're the second group. First group are the Astronomical Navigators. Second group, sea captains. The third group are shipbuilders, shipwrights, and naval architects. Shipbuilders. Shipwrights, that's ship, W-R-I-G-H-T-S. That means shipbuilders. And naval architects. They're not the people who design your Innie or your Audi. Naval architects design ships. So shipmakers. That's the third group. Now, occasionally, salty sea dog sea captains will interact with shipbuilders, but usually it's the owner of the ships, not the captain of the ships, that is working to build new ships. And as to navigators, they could be in a university somewhere. But Henry brings these people together under the belief that their ideas will cross-pollinate with one another. You know how I know this idea works? Because when I was in college, and after college, I worked as a contract security guard for BristolMyers Squib, that's a pharmaceutical company, research facility in Wallingford, Connecticut, the Pharmaceutical Research and Development Division, or PRDD. It was brand new, built in the late 1980s, and I was one of the first people to work there. I got paid well, and when I left college, I got about $30,000 a year, which in 1989, 1990, 1991 is good money. Starting out, especially for somebody who didn't have a college degree, which I didn't at that time. Now, this place was built on a couple square miles of landscape, ex-farmland. And they build this giant W on a hillside, like a medieval castle looking over the Quinnipiac River Valley from the hanging hills. This was massive, 5 stories tall for each of the wings. The nodes are 6 or 7 stories tall, depending. Why did they use this design? Well, the wings on each floor were designed to handle a different kind of science. You've got oncologists who specialize in cancer. You've got neurologists who specialize in the central nervous system and the brain. You've got cardiologists who specialize in heart problems and heart issues, pulmonologists who do lungs, and so on and so forth. And they're all in their wings doing their work with other specialists in their laboratories. But in this node, they had a factory on the ground floor. In this node, they had the library on the ground floor. In this node, they had a waterfall in the entryway on the ground floor. But going up 6 or 7 stories, 6 stories, 6 stories, 7 stories, they had a massive open space, like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, with ledges at each floor level. And on these ledges were trees and bushes and flowering plants and tables and chairs, comfortable tables and chairs. Places for break time, places where people would bring their lunch. Why? Why? Why did they invest in a 6-story tall window that looked out over the countryside like a medieval lord? Why did they invest in the Hanging Garden of Babylon look? Why in all these little tables and chairs? I'll tell you why. The company, BristolMyers Squib, spent real money to create places that would draw people in from their labs during breaks to interact with one another. They wouldn't always be with other oncologists if they were oncology. they would meet and they would talk to cardiologists, pulmonologists, neurologists, and the rest. Just BS with one another, talk with one another. But different specialties have different ways of assumption, different ways of thinking, different ways of experimenting. And the idea is that one specialty might get stuck, but by cross-pollinating with other specialties, by talking to them, it might create an epiphany, an aha moment, like Archimedes' Eureka, when he discovers water displacement. I will call on you. And it works. When I was working there, this lab discovered DDI, one of the first truly effective anti-AIDS drugs. It was developed in that place in part because the scientists who developed it could talk with other scientists of different specialties and just run ideas by them casually. It works. So by bringing in sea captains, shipbuilders, and navigators, Henry causes the three kinds of knowledge that any good ship captain needs to be right there. And because you're learning from all of these teachers at the same time, you're getting the best education you could in ship handling. Yeah.
Never mind.
Okay, sure. Okay. So, the Portuguese and others who graduate from Henry's school are going to change the world with their discoveries. But before we do that, let's look at some of the hard problems of sailing beyond the side of your coastline, of becoming what is called a blue water sailor. First problem, you don't know even what direction you're facing. So, I learned to do this when I was in elementary school. Maybe you learned also. You get a big wide-mouth glass, fill it partially with water. Get a cork, good, well-made cork, stable, floats on the water, nice. Place the cork in the water. You get a sewing needle, steel, iron, something like that. You get a magnet. You run the tip of the sewing needle up against the magnet. What you're doing is you're magnetizing the sewing needle. Magnetic field is jumping. Not only is it going to be on the magnet, it's also going to be on the needle. Once you've magnetized the needle, you place it gently on top of the center of the cork. Now, what's going to happen is because the cork is floating, and because the needle is on the needle will start out just sort of swiveling around and dealing with the momentum of being in this water. But eventually what will happen is a reaction, sympathetic, between the magnetized tip of the needle and the magnetic north pole will happen, and it will point this way, which is north. Now, we know that magnetic north and the actual north axis of the spinning Earth are not exactly the same thing, but they're close. With this needle pointing towards magnetic north, what else do I know? What direction is Sam from me? Anyone? South! And Miss Mary, what direction are you from me? North, south.
West.
You're west. And the whiteboards are to the east of me. That's right. So now, with the magnetic compass invented in China, but perfected for maritime use in Europe, we now have cardinal direction, down, because of magnetism. Now I'm going to tell you about the sextant, or the astrolabe. The sextant, or the astrolabe, has a lower strut with a hinge. And hanging from that lower strut is a plumb bob. A plumb bob is a weight. And here is a little 90-degree marker to make sure, even though you're in a ship at sea, if you hold it properly, plumb bob is going to face south, down, straight down, and you've got the little 90-degree marker to know that you're facing straight down. Okay. Then you've got an upper strut, and that upper strut has a sighting on it, and I'm going to sight midnight or whatever. Polaris, the North Star. Now, if every night at the same time Polaris is getting higher in the sky, the angle is getting bigger, what direction am I going? Polaris is getting higher in the sky. Polaris is the North Star.
North.
I'm going north! Because if I was at the North Pole, Polaris would be straight overhead. By the way, you want to talk about proof of God, or at least amazing coincidence? Do you know how unlikely it is that we have a bright star visible from the surface of the Earth in the Northern Hemisphere that's straight over the North Pole? That is so unusual. By the way, it wasn't always, and it won't always be there. But in human time, it's always been there. In the Southern Hemisphere, they don't have a pole star. They have to use offset mathematics and the Southern Cross, and it's much more difficult. But in the Northern Hemisphere, do any of you know how to find Polaris in the nighttime sky? None of you?
It's a lot.
Big Dipper. Giant ladle in the sky. There's a Little Dipper and there's the Big Dipper. You find the Big Dipper, it's two front stars, and you shoot downward from it. The first bright star that you come to in that line is Polaris. Comes with being a Boy Scout. By the way, you at home, if I remembered that wrong, write me and tell me. I think that's the way you do it, though. And you can find the Big Dipper because the last two stars of the Little Dipper point at it. In any event, Polaris, the North Star. So, what I have on the lower or on the upper, doesn't matter, is I have a banana clip shaped object with degrees. And by figuring out how high or low in the north sky, north of the Tropic of Cancer, Polaris is, I can tell you what. What does Polaris tell? What does a sextant tell when sighting on Polaris? What direction does it tell? Yeah? What are the other two? North and south. Polaris determines your latitude. Latitude are lines north and south that are imaginary on the planet. What is the most important line of latitude?
0.
What? Yes! Why is it called the equator? Does anyone remember?
It equates.
You know, if I threw this really fast.
I'd catch them.
Equator, yes, Ed.
Because it's equidistant from north and south.
Right! Mr. Hall, or whoever you had as a
Mr.
judge.
Miles.
Mr. Miles would be proud because the equator is equidistant from North and South Pole. So here's the North Pole. Here's the equator. South Pole's off the map, but you get the idea. Equator's the most important line of latitude. And the sextant tells you how far north or how far south you are by spotting objects in the heavens. Any questions? That's what we're doing for today. We'll continue with navigation tools and the age of discovery tomorrow.
Yay.
Do you have a question? Okay. Bye.